The government is now officially going to track your real estate transfers. You want to learn more? Watch this. So what am I referring to? If you caught my video back in April, I discussed FinCEN has created new regulations, proposed regulations at that time regarding tracking real estate transfers. That is, they want to have a reporting on the person that transfers a property and the person that receives a property. What they're doing is they're enacting something similar to the Corporate Transparency Act. Now, I'm going to put a link up here. If you look on the screen right now, there will be a link to that other video. You can watch it, and I go into detail about the new reporting or what they plan to track. Now, the one thing about that is there is one modification. I'll share that with you. And if you stick through to the end, you'll find I have a link as well that I'm going to provide you to a special report that I put together with how it works and some workarounds that I definitely you're going to look at to get away from this tracking. So essentially, what have they done? So now what they've done is they've stated that any type of real estate transfers that do not involve commercial financing. All right. So what I mean by that is that they do not involve getting a loan from a reporting agency like a lender that has to report to the federal government that for financial crimes and the like. So if there's a piece of property here and it is being transferred into an entity that is an LLC, a corporation, a limited partnership, a statutory trust, or a living trust, a land trust, a residence trust. I mean, general grantor trust, this applies to as well. So if this property is being transferred into this or sold to that entity, whatever that is, then FinCEN is now requiring that that you report on the transferor. So just like with the Corporate Transparency Act, where you have to provide their name, copy of their ID, address, all the like, all that information is now going to be collected on the person transferring the property and on the entity receiving the property. So if there is a transfer of real estate without financing, like I stated, then you will be reporting to FinCEN on the transferor and on the transferee entity owners. Okay, so now again, it's not person to person, it's from an individual or entity or whatever to. So what they're looking at is who is receiving the property. And they're saying, hey, it's to combat money laundering. That, again, there's a lot of people out there committing money laundering, using LLCs and businesses to hide their ownership. Now, what does this apply to? So it applies to any property that is 4 units or less, or land that you intend to build on, or an interest in the community, like a cooperative. Okay, condos, all that would apply as long as it's 4 units or less. Then it will have to be reported on. So you not only do report on this party, you also look at and you say, all right, who's involved with this entity over here? So if there were 2 individuals, then you would report on both of those individuals on behalf and on the entity itself as well. So it's very similar. Mirrors the Corporate Transparency Act quite a bit. But what's different with this versus the Corporate Transparency Act is, as I talked about, under the FinCEN regulations for property transfers, they're also hitting us. Oh, that's too big. They're also hitting you when you transfer property into trust. Now, a lot of individuals like to use land trusts. So if you're transferring your real estate into land trusts, I do work with this all the time with real estate investors, is that we have our property here and we move it into a land trust. Under the proposed regulations, this would be a reportable transaction, meaning that you would have to report the fact that you transferred property into your own land trust. And then once it's transferred in, you have to report on the trustee and you have to report on the beneficiaries of this trust. So again, license, name, address, all of that stuff's going to be reported. Well, in the comments that FinCEN took in based upon their proposed regulations, they decided that transfers into entities are going to stick. So if you have property and you're transferring into your LLC, a series LLC, you name it, then those types of transfers will still be reported on. So you'll have to report it when you move your own property into your own LLC. But when property is moved into a trust, they did carve out an exception from the proposed regulations. And if you watch my video, you're going to see in there where I say, hey, land trust, you still got to report. Well, that's no longer the case under the final regs. So what you can do now is if you set up a land trust here, And this is really important when it comes to drafting the trust agreement. You have to do the following two things. Number one, you have to list yourself as grantor under the trust agreement. I've seen trusts where they don't even refer to a grantor. You must list yourself as a grantor, and you must list yourself as a beneficiary. You have to be a beneficiary and a grantor of the trust. Now, if you fall into those two categories right there in your trust agreement, when you draft it, it says Clint is a grantor, Clint is the beneficiary of this trust. And if I own a piece of property here, this house, and I don't want government tracking my transfers, then I can move my house into this land trust here, and that is a non-reportable transaction. Now, if you're familiar with trust, you probably noticed that I didn't mention some party here. That is your trustee. Okay, who is your trustee of this land trust? Does it have to be me? Because if I'm listed as my own trustee, then I'm losing my anonymity. Well, they didn't address that. They were silent on the trustee. They just wanted to make sure that it's going from an individual who owns a property now, and that same individual is a grantor and beneficiary of the trust. So this leaves open the fact that you can still use a nominee trustee for your land trust for privacy reasons. So if I was setting this up, then I would have, like in our case, I've been on thousands upon thousands of trusts, or we use an attorney in our firm. Actually, my son Carter now is the trustee on many trusts. So we put down that attorney as your initial nominee trustee. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, check out my channel on land trust. I have a lot of videos on land trusts and how to set them up, especially using a nominee trustee. So we're going to still use a nominee trustee, but you will not have to report in this context. Now, if you own the property with your spouse, well, same deal here. You got to have your spouse on as a trustee and a grantor, because both of you, I assume, are conveying your interest in this property to the trust. Now, what would not work is that in a lot of situations, you'll see that we create land trusts like this. All right, here's your land trust, and then you have a LLC down here as the beneficiary of the trust, and then you own the limited liability company that owns the land trust, and then you deed the property into the land trust. That will not work, okay? In that scenario, it doesn't apply because the LLC is listed as the beneficiary of the trust. That's why you have to be really careful on how you're structuring these deals so you do not run afoul of the law. Because remember, the law goes into effect December 1 of 2025. And just like the Corporate Transparency Act, they have huge penalties for people who do not comply with this new regulation for tracking property transfers. Now, like the proposed regulations, what's interesting in this is that if you put property into a land trust here, let's say I create a land trust and I'm the beneficiary and it owns a piece of property. So let's say you go out there today and you start putting your property in the land trust and you don't do anything else. You're just sitting on them. And then on January 1st of 2026, after this regulation has gone into effect, you think, oh, I need to get my land trust into my LLC for asset protection. Because if something happens here, I don't want to be held personally liable. Well, when you transfer your land trust into the LLC, that's not a reportable transfer. You see, the only reportable transfers you have is when it goes to the entity originally. Transfers of the entity owning real estate after the fact are not reportable. So that is very important in understanding how this law applies so that there are strategies then we can implement, especially for investors who buy property subject to existing mortgages. Again, I'm going to give you a link. I got a report that covers all that for subject to investors, how to move if you're going to move property into a structure, how you should be doing it now to make sure that when this law goes into effect, you do not have to disclose your information. But I also want to drop on you this. One of the key aspects of this strategy here is that the property is not being sold, okay? Or there wasn't a sale in place. And so what do I mean by that? You're probably wondering, why am I bringing this up? Well, you never know, okay? I'll get comments on this from people on my channel. So here's what happens. If I have a piece of property and I set up a land trust where I am the beneficiary of this trust, and I structure this deal as a sale to the trust, then that's reportable. Okay, so you cannot sell the property. There can be no consideration given for this transfer. And I think that was designed to pick up situations where you maybe have a third party selling it and the third party shows up here as the initial beneficiary just to get by. I mean, you could do this, right? You could say, all right, this is the seller. Okay, the seller, let me just make them a different color. So Blue Man here owns a property. Now, creative real estate investor thinks, okay, so if Blue Man is a beneficiary of the trust, then it didn't say Blue Man has to be 100% beneficiary. In fact, Blue Man only has to be a 1% beneficiary of this trust under the regulations, the way you read them. And I am the 100% or 99% beneficiary. What I will do then is say I'm going to buy this house for $150K. I'll put $150,000 into my trust, and then I'm going to buy the property from Blue Man, and he's going to transfer it to the trust, and then he's going to transfer me his 1% interest, and I take over, and nothing gets reported. Won't happen, okay? Because that was a sale. So sales, they do have the exception here that when you're transferring real estate into a trust, there cannot be any consideration given to the transferor for that transaction. Now, on the other hand, if we were doing this same transaction, if I was doing that same transaction here, and this is my land trust, and Blue Man's over here, and I'm going to buy the property for $150K. If I obtain financing, let's say with Wells Fargo to put this deal together, well then if he sells it to my trust, there's no reporting there because I've got debt. I use financing with Wells Fargo, who is a reporting agency. Therefore, I am free and clear in that one, and nothing would have to be reported because of the fact that there's debt on the property there, or actually financing was used. Which, by the same token, let me throw another example at you, since we're on the topic of financing. I'm not using Wells Fargo, who is like a reporting agency, the way they look at it. Instead, I'm using my cousin Vinny. All right, so here's Vinny over here. So Vinny's like, all right, I'll loan you money. I'm going to loan you money at 15% interest. Okay, great. So you're loaning money at 15. Hard money, Vinny here. So in that scenario, Vinny loans me the $150K to pay Blue Man to buy the house. Well, since Vinny is definitely not reporting, he's probably one step out of going to jail because he's into other stuff he shouldn't be into. They've considered this. And so that would be a situation where you would have to report on the trustee, the beneficiary of this trust, who set it up, plus you'd have to report over here on the transferor of the property. So as you can see, you can just, it doesn't have to be an individual. This could be an LLC that's transferring the property. It's all the same. These things will get taxed. Now, by the way, here's another scenario in which something may come up. Let's say you have an LLC and you have a couple properties inside of it. And now you decide you want to switch some of these properties out and you don't want to have to report. I want to get this property over here into LLC number 2. Here's what I would do. I would set up land trust here where the LLC is the grantor and the beneficiary of the trust. Okay, we just met the requirement. Then I would transfer my property into the land trust, get my property into the land trust. Now, that's a non-reportable transaction because, as I stated earlier, hey, we're using a trust. The LLC is the one that's a grantor and beneficiary. And then I would take my land trust and pop it over here to get this property out of the LLC number 1 into LLC number 2 without there actually being a trail of this transfer on a public record standpoint, and it's not a trail for FinCEN as well. So I've got some great examples of when it is reportable versus when it's not reportable and a breakdown of the actual new regulations. All you have to do is, I'm putting up a link right now. If you go to that link, you can download this free report for you to help break it all down for you. And if you're reading it, you're thinking, hey, I need to do something right now, I would highly encourage you, if you have real estate, start getting these transfers done before this goes into effect. Because after that goes into effect, it just makes our lives more complicated. So you've got a window of opportunity now. If you wanted some assistance with that, or you just like to discuss it in more detail, click on the More button below in the show notes. You just click on the More button. There are links down there where you can set up a free strategy session with someone here at Anderson, and we can help guide you through this process. All right? Take care.